Disclaimer. This is a work of complete fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, locations, and events are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. He knew. That's the part that never left her. Not the betrayal itself, not the photograph, not the woman's name, not the years of careful lies. What broke something permanent inside Serena Vale was the knowledge that Lucian had known she was in labor. His lieutenant had a jet fueled and waiting on a private strip outside Palermo. The hospital had called. 2 of his own men had knocked on the bedroom door. And Lucian Moretti, the man who once told her she was the only thing in his life that wasn't a transaction, had looked toward the hallway, heard the knock, and said 2 words that rewrote every year of their marriage. Not yet, he went back to bed. Serena found out 3 days later, sitting in a hospital room with a newborn against her chest and an empty chair beside her bed, when Marco, his most loyal lieutenant, a man who had taken a bullet for Lucian, twice sat down across from her, looked at the floor, and told her what had happened in that house in Sicily. He couldn't look at her when he said it. She didn't cry. She just stared at the chair and understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water through every vein, that she had spent 7 years protecting a man who didn't protect the hour his son was born. That was enough to subscribe. If you want to see how this story ends, and trust me, it ends in a way nobody saw coming, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single part. Drop a like on this video and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it really started. 4 days before Nico Moretti came into the world screaming and underweight and perfect, Serena was standing in the kitchen of their Manhattan penthouse at 11 at night trying to decide whether the tightening across her lower back was the baby or the stress. She was 38 weeks and 4 days along. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours in a stretch for the past 2 weeks. The penthouse was enormous and silent in the particular way that large, expensive spaces get silent when the person who fills them isn't home. And Lucian had been in Sicily for 6 days. He'd promised 2. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter and did the things she'd trained herself not to do. She did the math. 6 days. She hadn't pushed back when he left because she understood the business, or told herself she did. There was always a reason, a shipment, a sit-down, a problem that only Lucian could solve because only Lucian had the authority, the reputation, the 20 years of carefully constructed fear that kept the Moretti name worth something in rooms she was never allowed to enter. She understood that. She'd signed up for that. She'd told herself she understood it even when she was 7 months pregnant and he'd flown to Miami for 9 days to handle something he described only as a complication. But she was 38 weeks now, and her back was tightening in a way that felt like a warning, and her husband was in Sicily. And when she called his cell, it rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She stood at the counter until the tightening passed, then went to bed and told herself it was nothing. She woke at 4 in the morning to the second contraction. It wasn't nothing. She called her sister, first Alina, who lived 40 minutes away in Brooklyn and had been on standby for 3 weeks with an overnight bag already packed. Then she called Marcus Chen, their family attorney, for no clear reason she could articulate at the time. She would understand it later. Then she called Lucian. This time it rang twice. He answered. Serena. His voice was sleep-thick and careful in the way it got when he was managing something. Not just tired, but measured. Controlled. I'm having contractions, she said. They're about 8 minutes apart. Elena's coming. A pause. Just a half second. But she'd been married to him long enough to know what lived in his pauses. How far apart did you say? 8 minutes. Lucian, I need to know if you're getting on a plane. Another pause. Longer. Let me make a call, he said. I'll figure it out. Keep me posted on the timing. Keep me posted. She almost said something then. She had the words right there, sitting on her tongue like something sharp. But Elena was coming and her back was screaming, and she needed to focus on what was actually happening in her body right now, not on the particular way her husband had just reduced his son's birth to a scheduling problem. Okay, she said. She hung up and started timing. Elena arrived at 4:52, still in her coat, smelling like cold air, and took one look at Serena braced against the bathroom doorframe and said, "We're going." I know. Where's Lucian? Sicily. Elena said nothing. That was its own answer, the careful nothing of a woman who had been keeping her opinion of Lucian Moretti locked behind her teeth for 3 years. She just picked up the bag and put her hand on Serena's back and walked her to the elevator. In the car, Serena called Lucian again. It rang 6 times. Voicemail. She put the phone in her coat pocket and watched the Manhattan streets scroll past at 5 in the morning empty and gray, and lit up orange from the street lamps, and breathed through the next contraction and thought about the first time she'd met him. She'd been 24, working at a corporate law firm, and he'd come in for a meeting about a maritime shipping acquisition, and he had a way of sitting in a room like the room had been built specifically to hold him. Not arrogant, something quieter than arrogance, certain, like he'd already calculated every exit and decided he didn't need them. She'd thought it was confidence. She'd built a whole marriage on that misreading. Mercy General, the maternity ward. A room on the 4th floor with a window that looked out over the parking structure. Elena was there. 2 nurses she'd never met were there. Dr. Kowalski, her OB, arrived at 7:15 with coffee breath and calm hands and the specific professional warmth of a woman who had delivered thousands of babies and knew that the husband's absence was not her department. Lucian was not there. He called at 6:40. "My guys have the jet ready," he said. "Flight time is about 9.5 hours. I'm Serena. I need another hour here. There's something I need to handle before I can leave." She was in active labor. The contraction that hit while he was talking about the jet took her breath away completely, and she had to wait it out with the phone pressed against her ear and Elena's hand on her shoulder before she could speak. "An hour," she said when it passed. "Maybe 2. I'll be on the plane by 8 local time, I promise." 8 local time in Sicily was 2 in the morning in New York. She did that math without thinking about it. 9.5 hours. He would land at 11:30 in the morning at the earliest. She had no idea how long this labor was going to take, but she knew enough to know it might not be 11:30. "Okay," she said. That was the last time she said okay to something that wasn't okay. She didn't know that yet. She would know it soon. Nico arrived at 6:47 a.m. He was 6 pounds, 4 ounces, and he screamed the moment he came out like he had opinions about the whole situation that he needed to express immediately. And Dr. Kowalski laughed and Elena cried, and Serena held him against her chest with both hands shaking and looked at his face. This small, furious, extraordinary face, and felt something she had no word for. Something huge and aching and clean. Then she looked at the chair beside the bed. Empty. Elena was crying too hard to speak. One of the nurses had stepped out. The room was very quiet except for Nico's breathing, which had settled from fury into something small, and even his whole tiny chest rising and falling against Serena's skin. Serena did not cry. She just looked at the chair and held her son, and made a decision so quiet and so final that it didn't feel like a decision at all. It felt like something that had already happened, and she was only now catching up to it. She wasn't going to be the woman in this chair anymore. Whatever came next, she was done waiting for Lucian Moretti to arrive. He landed at JFK at 12:40 p.m. Marco had texted her, not Lucian. Marco, that the plane had touched down. She didn't respond. Elena was asleep in the chair beside her. Nico was in the bassinet, finally quiet, his small fists clenched even in sleep, like he was ready for an argument. Serena had been awake for 32 hours and felt simultaneously exhausted down to her marrow and more alert than she'd been in years. Every sense sharpened to something uncomfortable and precise. When the door opened at 2:15 and Lucian walked in with a bracelet from a jeweler she recognized by the turquoise box, wearing a jacket that looked like it had been put on in a car, she had a very clear thought. He actually thinks this is fixable. He stopped when he saw her face. Whatever he'd prepared, she could see him calculating the way he always did, reading a room, adjusting his approach. It left him when he looked at her eyes. He was not a stupid man. He was in many ways one of the most perceptive people she'd ever met. That was part of what had made her trust him. He set the box on the table near the door without saying anything. "He's beautiful," Lucian said, finally looking at Nico. His voice did something complicated. Whatever else he was, whatever he'd chosen in that bedroom in Sicily, she could see that the sight of his son touched something real in him. She didn't doubt that. She had never doubted that he was capable of love. She had simply learned, over 7 years, that love was not the same as showing up. "His name is Nico," she said. "Nico." He said it quietly, like he was memorizing it. Nico James Moretti. She'd added the middle name at 7 in the morning, alone, while Elena slept. James was her father's name. She hadn't discussed it with Lucian. "I had to put something on the birth certificate." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and she could see him understanding the weight of what she'd just said. She hadn't waited, hadn't called, hadn't saved the decision for when he arrived. She'd named their son without him. Not cruelly, not as a punishment. Simply because she'd been there, and he hadn't, and the paperwork needed to be done, and she was the parent who was present. Serena, I'm tired, she said. I've been awake for over 30 hours. If you want to hold him, you can. But I'm not having this conversation today. He didn't push. That surprised her a little. He picked up Nico with careful hands. He'd never held a newborn before. She could see him figuring out the weight and the angle, and stood there by the window with his son. And for a long moment, the room was just the two of them and the sleeping baby and everything that had already been decided. Serena closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. She thought about Marcus Chen. Marcus came to the hospital 2 days later, at Serena's request, on the pretense of handling some property documents that needed her signature. She'd been his client for 4 years technically. She was listed as Moretti Family Counsel. But Marcus had a way of understanding who he was actually working for in any given situation. He was 61, compact, meticulous, with the kind of face that gave away absolutely nothing in a negotiation. He'd once sat across from 2 Moretti capos and a federal mediator for 9 hours and walked out with exactly what he came for. She trusted him completely. They met in a small consultation room down the hall from her room while Elena watched Nico. The door closed. Marcus set his briefcase on the table and looked at her with the specific expression of a man who already knows why he's been called. I need to know what my options look like, Serena said. In general, he said carefully, or specifically. Specifically. She folded her hands on the table. Her voice was steady. She'd been rehearsing this for 2 days, finding the steadiness. I want to know what a divorce from Lucian Moretti looks like. Assets, custody, my exposure to his business interests. All of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Serena, he said. Not a warning, more like confirmation. He needed to make sure she knew what she was beginning. She said, once I start pulling those records, since I know what it means. She looked at him. He missed Nico's birth. He was in Sicily, Marcus. He knew I was in labor, and he stayed. Marcus absorbed this without expression. He chose to stay, she said. I need to know what comes after that choice. He opened his briefcase. The conversation with Elena happened that night. After visiting hours, after Lucian had left to handle something at the Moretti offices, and Marcus had gone home and the ward had gone quiet. Elena sat in the chair beside the bed, the chair with Nico asleep in her arms, and told Serena the things she'd been not telling her for 3 years. I saw something, Elena said. At the benefit in October. 2 years ago, Serena waited. He was with a woman. In the parking garage. I told myself, Elena, stop. Her jaw tightened. I told myself it was a work thing. That I was misreading it. I didn't want to be the person who broke up your marriage over something I might have misread. But you didn't misread it. Elena looked at Nico. No. Serena thought about the benefit in October 2 years ago. She'd been there. She'd worn the blue dress he'd bought her from Milan. She'd stood in the ballroom and talked to 3 senators and a shipping magnate and thought, not for the first time, that she was good at this life. Better than she'd expected to be. She'd thought he was in a meeting. Tell me her name, Serena said. I don't know her name. Tell me what she looked like, Elena told her. And as she described the woman younger, dark-haired, the specific way Lucian had touched her shoulder, Serena felt the last 7 years rearranging themselves in her mind. All the late nights, the trips, the silences she'd filled in with explanations that made sense, and the explanations had been wrong, had always been wrong. And she had chosen not to look directly at that because looking at it meant destroying the thing she'd built. She'd been so good at not looking. I need you to help me find her name, Serena said. Elena looked up, not because I want a confrontation, because I need to understand what I'm actually dealing with. Serena looked at her son, small and breathing in Elena's arms. I've spent 7 years protecting him. It's time to understand exactly what I was protecting. She found the photograph the next day. Or rather, Marcus found it not deliberately, while pulling financial records. A document had been misfiled among the corporate papers, or perhaps not misfiled at all. Perhaps it had been placed there by someone who understood that Serena would eventually be looking through those papers. She would think about that later. At the time, she just held the photograph and looked at it. It was dated 14 months ago. Lucian and a woman at what appeared to be a private residence in Sicily. The architecture was distinctive. The stone walls, the specific kind of light that only comes off Mediterranean coastline in late afternoon. They were not simply standing near each other. The photograph was very clear about what they were. Her name, according to a note attached to the photograph, was Bianca Russo. Serena sat with the photograph for a long time. Then she called Marcus and told him to proceed. Lucian arrived at the hospital that afternoon with coffee and a paper bag from the Italian place she used to love on West 56th, and found her sitting up in bed with her arms folded and her face arranged into an expression he'd never seen on her before. Not angry. Anger was hot and loud, and it passed. What she felt right now was colder than anger and had no edges and nowhere to go. "Who is Bianca Russo?" she said. He stopped in the doorway. The paper bag crinkled in his hand. She watched him make the decision. She could literally see it happen, the calibration, the assessment of what she knew versus what he could still manage. That was what she had never understood about him until this moment. Even now, even here, his first instinct was to manage the information. Not to feel, not to break down, to manage, Sit said. He sat. "Don't lie to me," she said. "I have the photograph. I have 14 months of banking records that Marcus pulled. I'm not asking you whether it happened. I'm asking you who she is." The room was very quiet. "Serena, is she the reason you stayed in Sicily while I had our son?" He looked at the floor. That was her answer. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She sat very still and breathed and thought about the woman in that photograph, the 14 months, the benefit in October, Elena's face when she'd finally said it, and the chair beside the bed that had been empty at 6:47 in the morning when her son came into the world. "I want you to understand something," she said. Her voice was completely even. "You didn't just miss his birth. You made a choice to miss it. You knew I was in labor. You had a plane waiting, and you chose to stay. That's not a mistake. That's not a complication. That's a decision you made about what mattered more." He started to speak. "I'm not finished." He went quiet. "I've contacted Marcus. I'm filing for divorce." She watched his face. "I have Nico, I have the documents, and I have the photograph." A pause. "I want this handled quietly and fairly. I don't want a war. I want out." Serena, his voice cracked on her name. Actually cracked. And she hated herself a little for noticing that it was real, that the pain in his voice was real, because a man could be genuinely devastated and still have done what he did. Devastation was not the same as innocence. "You can see Nico," she said. "I'm not going to take him from you. But," this she gestured between them, "is done." He sat there for a long moment. Then, quietly, "I'm going to fix this." "You can't fix this one, Lucian." He looked up at her. "Some things you break," she said, "and the breaking is permanent. This is one of those things." He didn't accept it. She hadn't expected him to. She knew how he operated, the same persistence that had built the empire. When Lucian Moretti decided he wanted something, he approached it the way he approached everything. Systematically, patiently, with absolute certainty that the obstacle would eventually move. He called 3 times the day after she told him. She didn't answer the first 2. On the third, she picked up. "I ended it," he said. No preamble. "It's done." "Okay," she said. "I need you to know that. I heard you. That's all you're going to say?" She thought about how to explain it to him, that ending the affair was not the wound, that the wound was the choice he'd made at a bedroom door in Sicily when his lieutenant knocked and he said not yet. But she'd learned in 3 days of lying in a hospital bed that some things could not be explained to someone who didn't already understand them. And if Lucian understood it, he would have made a different choice. "I know you mean it," she said. "I know you believe you're going to change. I've been in this marriage long enough to know that you're not lying to me right now." She shifted Nico to her other arm. "But I've also been in this marriage long enough to know what you choose when there's a conflict between your world and your family. You make the same choice every time. And I'm not raising our son inside that pattern." Silence on the line. "Come see Nico this afternoon," she said. "Spend time with him. That's what matters right now." She hung up before he could respond. He came that afternoon and sat with Nico for 2 hours. She watched him from the doorway for a while. He didn't know she was there, and whatever else she felt, she did not doubt what she saw on his face when he looked at his son. That was real. That had always been real. But real love and right choices were 2 different things, and she was done confusing them. Elena arrived at 4 with food and the particular expression of a woman who has been waiting a long time to say "I told you so," and has decided, out of love, not to say it. "How are you doing?" Elena asked. "I'm figuring out where we go from here," Serena said. "That's what I'm doing." Elena said, just that. Serena looked at her. She confirmed. 3 days after she came home from the hospital, with Nico wrapped in the blue blanket her mother had sent from Chicago, Lucian called her at 6 in the morning. She'd been awake since 2, which was the new normal, feeding and settling and feeding again. And she answered because she recognized the ring pattern that meant it wasn't social. "I need you at the Chelsea office at 9, he said. "There's a meeting." She stared at the ceiling in the dark of her bedroom. Nico's bassinet was 2 feet away, and he was asleep for the first time in 4 hours. "You're not serious," she said. "I know the timing is. I am home with a 4-day-old child, Lucian. It's about the Moretti Group companies. Your name is on 3 of the board positions. The other parties need. Then send Marcus. I'm not coming to a meeting about your empire 4 days after giving birth. This is exactly what I was telling you about, she said. Not loud, just flat. This is the thing that I said doesn't work. I'm sitting here at 6 in the morning and you're calling me about a meeting. A pause. I'll push it to noon, he said. She almost laughed. Push it to next month, she said. Or send Marcus. I'm going back to sleep. She hung up. He didn't push it to next month. He showed up at the house at 11:45 with 2 of his men waiting downstairs, and the particular energy of a man who had decided that showing up was a form of persuasion. She opened the door with Nico on her shoulder and looked at him. I told you no, she said. The meeting is at noon. It's 10 minutes from here. I'll have you home by 1. I'm not going, Serena. He lowered his voice. There are men in that room who need to see that the family is stable. It matters what... I'm done mattering to your business, she said. She adjusted Nico on her shoulder. He was starting to fuss. I filed the papers this morning. You'll hear from Marcus. Lucian went still. The meeting is yours, she said. The empire is yours. I built a life here for 7 years supporting something I barely understood so that you could walk into rooms and be taken seriously, and I'm done. She looked at him. You have men downstairs. Go to your meeting. She closed the door. She stood in the hallway with her son on her shoulder and listened to the silence on the other side of the door for a long moment. Then she heard him walk away. That was when she knew it was really over. Not when she'd said it in the hospital. Not when she'd found the photograph. Now when she'd closed the door and he'd walked away, something finished. Something that had been stretched thin for a very long time finally released. She carried Nico to the living room and sat down in the quiet and breathed. She didn't know yet about Danny Caruso. She didn't know about the conspiracy that had been running underneath her marriage for years. She didn't know that the photograph hadn't been left in those files by accident, or that Bianca Russo had been maneuvered as carefully as any piece on a board. She didn't know that disappearing with her son was going to become necessary, not just personal. She was just a woman who had finally closed a door. But the people who had engineered that closing were already moving their next pieces, and Serena Vale, who had spent 7 years protecting Lucian Moretti's world, was about to discover that she had been the piece they'd been trying to move all along. She looked down at Nico. He was watching her face with the specific, unfocused attention of a newborn who doesn't see clearly yet, but knows somehow that the person holding him is the one who matters. Okay, she said softly. Here's what we're going to do. She didn't know yet what came next. She just knew that whatever it was, she was the one deciding it. And for the first time in 7 years, that was enough to start. This is a work of complete fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, locations, and events are entirely fictional. She found the bug on a Tuesday, not metaphorically. An actual device smaller than a thumbnail, matte black, the kind of thing that cost serious money and left no fingerprints. It was pressed into the seam beneath the windowsill in the living room, exactly where someone would stand if they were holding a baby and watching the street below. Serena found it because Nico had dropped his pacifier behind the radiator, and she'd gotten down on her knees to fish it out, and her hand ran along the baseboard, and she felt the edge of something that wasn't supposed to be there. She didn't pull it out. She sat back on her heels and held the pacifier and looked at the device and breathed very carefully through her nose. Then she stood up, picked up Nico, and walked to the kitchen and turned on the faucet and stood close to the running water the way she'd seen it done in movies and thought, someone has been listening to everything that happens in this apartment. The question was who? She called Marcus from a payphone 2 blocks away. She hadn't used a payphone since college and she'd had to walk 3 streets to find one. Nico in the carrier against her chest, cold air burning her face. And when Marcus picked up, she could hear the immediate shift in his voice when she told him where she was calling from. But, "Don't say anything specific," he said. "I found something in the apartment." How many? She hadn't thought to look for more than one. "I only found one. Assume there are more." His voice was completely flat. Not alarmed, Marcus didn't do alarmed, but stripped of the professional warmth. This was the other Marcus, the one she'd seen once across a negotiating table. The one who understood that some conversations had weight beyond what the words carried. Go somewhere you know is clean. Don't go back to the apartment until we've talked. Nico's with me. Good, keep him with you. A pause. Do you need me to come to you? Yes, she said. She hung up and stood on the sidewalk with her son pressed against her sternum and the city moving around her taxis and pedestrians and someone's music bleeding from an open window 3 floors up. And for the first time since she'd closed the door. On Lucian, she felt the specific cold of being exposed. Someone had been inside her apartment. Someone had installed a listening device beneath her windowsill. And the only people who used devices like that in her world, in the world she was trying to leave, were people who were preparing for something. Marcus arrived at Elena's apartment in Brooklyn 40 minutes later with a man she didn't recognize, a compact Korean American in his 50s, and she was introduced only as a specialist, and who spent 20 minutes going through Elena's apartment with a device the size of a television remote before nodding and saying, "Clean." They sat at Elena's kitchen table. Elena had taken Nico into the bedroom and closed the door. The specialist sat in the corner with his equipment and didn't speak. "Walk me through when you noticed it," Marcus said. She did every detail. The dropped pacifier, the baseboard, the size of the device, the placement. Marcus listened with his hands flat on the table. "That's professional installation," he said when she finished. "Not Lucian's style. His people are thorough but subtle. Whoever placed that was trying not to be found. So not Lucian." "I didn't say that." He looked at her carefully. "It could be someone working for him. It could be someone working against him. It could be a federal installation, though they'd typically need a warrant, and the placement you're describing isn't consistent with how that usually goes." He paused. "When did you last have service people in the apartment? Cleaning, maintenance, anyone?" She thought. "A plumber 3 weeks ago, and the cleaning service regular Thursday. I'll need the names of both." "Marcus," she leaned forward. "What aren't you telling me?" He was quiet for a moment. "When I was pulling your financial records for the divorce proceedings," he said slowly, "I found some irregularities. In the Moretti Group accounts, specifically in the structure of the subsidiary companies your name is attached to." He paused again. "Serena, 3 of those companies have been used to move money through accounts that are flagged by federal monitoring systems." She stared at him. "Your name is on the board," he said. "You never had operational control, but your signature appears on several filings. I signed what Lucian gave me to sign. I know that." "Marcus, I didn't know what those documents were mine. I know that too." His voice was firm. "But the question is whether anyone who's currently looking at those accounts knows that, or whether it matters to them." The kitchen was very quiet. "Someone's been setting something up," she said. "That's what it looks like." "For how long?" "Based on what I've found so far, at least 2 years. Maybe longer." 2 years. She thought about the benefit in October. Elena's face in the hospital room. The photograph dated 14 months ago. The timing of things she'd dismissed as coincidence was rearranging itself in her mind into something that looked less like coincidence and more like architecture. "I need to know who Danny Caruso is," she said. Marcus looked at her sharply. His name came up in one of the filings. "Lucian mentioned him to me once as his financial chief, but I never met him." "Daniel Caruso has been with the Moretti organization for 11 years, Marcus said carefully. "He manages the legitimate side. The companies, the real estate holdings, the shipping interests. He's the reason those businesses are as clean as they appear." A pause. "He's also the reason they appear cleaner than they are." "You think it's him?" "I think," Marcus said, "that someone with access to the financial architecture of the Moretti organization, access to Lucian's personal schedule and movements, and a reason to want Lucian destabilized, would look a lot like Danny Caruso." She sat with that. "Destabilized," she repeated. "A divorce from his wife, who holds 3 board positions in his legitimate companies. A public affair. A succession crisis." Marcus spread his hands flat on the table. "Someone who wanted control of those companies would need you gone. Or controllable." "And my signature," she said quietly. "On certain asset transfers, yes. Your signature on those documents would be legally required." The pieces were lining up in a way that made her stomach drop. "He used Bianca to distract Lucian," she said. "Not a question. It's possible. And the photograph, it was left in the files deliberately." "I believe so. So I would find it." She pressed her fingers against the table. "So I'd file for divorce. So I'd take Nico and step back from the companies." She looked at Marcus. "And then someone would approach me with documents to sign." Marcus said nothing, which was its own answer. She called Lucian. She almost didn't. Every instinct she'd been building since the hospital, the careful new architecture of her independence, said, "Don't call him. You're outside this now. Let it burn without you." But she wasn't outside it. That was the thing she understood, sitting at Elena's kitchen table with the specialist in the corner and Marcus across from her. She'd never been outside it. Her name was on the documents. The device in her apartment had been installed by someone who was tracking her. Her son was in the next room, and the world she'd tried to leave had apparently decided she didn't get to leave yet. She called Lucian. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the background noise of the Moretti office's murmured voices, someone on another phone. "I need to meet you," she said. Not at the apartment. Not at your office. Somewhere neutral. A beat. What happened? Someone installed a listening device in the apartment. Lucian. Was that you? The background noise shifted. She heard him move. A door closing, the sound cutting off. Now just him. No, he said. The single syllable was flat and immediate, and she believed it. She'd spent 7 years learning to read him. He was not lying. Marcus thinks it might be Caruso. Silence, Lucian. Who told you about Caruso? Marcus found irregularities in the accounts. My accounts. The companies my name is on. She kept her voice level. Someone's been using those structures for 2 years. And someone put a device in my apartment to monitor what I know and who I'm talking to. More silent this time. Are you somewhere safe? He asked. I'm at Elena's. Stay there. His voice had changed, the personal frequency gone, replaced by something operational, the tone she'd heard him use exactly twice in 7 years when something was genuinely wrong. Don't go back to the apartment. Don't use your regular phone for anything sensitive. I'm not taking orders from you, she said. I'm not calling you because I want your protection. I'm calling you because you need to understand that whatever Caruso is doing, he's using me to do it. My name, my signature. And if that blows up, it doesn't just blow up on you. He was quiet. I'm also calling you, she said, and her voice went very steady because someone threatened my son's safety by putting surveillance equipment in my home. And if you know something about who's doing this and why, I need you to tell me right now. I'll find out what I know, he said. And then I'll tell you everything. You have 24 hours, she said. She hung up. He called her back in 4. She was still at Elena's. Nico finally asleep in the portable crib Elena had pulled from her storage closet, the apartment dark except for the kitchen light. Elena was pretending to watch television in the other room. Marcus had gone home 2 hours ago with a list of documents to pull. Lucian's voice when she answered was different from the last call. Quieter, more controlled. The specific control of someone who has just learned something they wish they hadn't. I need to meet you, he said, tonight. You said you'd tell me what you know. Not on the phone. She looked at the closed bedroom door where Nico was sleeping. Elena's lobby, she said. 30 minutes. You come alone. He came alone. She met him downstairs in the small lobby, with the doorman pretending not to listen from his station. They stood 6 feet apart. He looked like he hadn't slept in the hours since she'd called him, which meant he'd been working the problem, calling people, pulling threads. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not grief. Not anger. It was the expression of a man who has just discovered the map he's been using was drawn by someone who wanted him lost. Tell me, she said. Caruso has been running a paracel structure inside the organization for at least 3 years. He kept his voice low. On paper, he's been managing the legitimate side. In reality, he's been systematically moving assets out of accounts into shell companies that he controls. Not me. Small transfers, consistent. The kind of thing that takes years to add up and longer to notice. His jaw tightened. He used the legitimate companies your company's in as the clean pipeline. The ones your name is on. He needed my signature to complete certain transfers. Yes, and the divorce makes it harder for me to access those accounts directly. Puts you in a position where you'd be signing independently without going through me. He looked at her. Caruso's been planning this for a long time. Bianca was his introduction. He brought her into my orbit 18 months ago. The cold settled deeper. He arranged the affair, she said. He arranged the introduction. The rest he stopped. The rest I did myself. I'm not blaming Caruso for my own choices. She absorbed this. He used your weakness, she said. But the weakness was real. Yes, she looked at him. The lobby was quiet. The doorman had found something to organize at the far end of his station. The photograph, she said, placed in those files by someone with access to Marcus's office, or to the documents before they reached him. He paused. I don't think you were supposed to find it accidentally. I think it was put there so you'd find it at exactly this point in the divorce proceedings. So I'd move fast. Sign things. Get out. So you'd be emotional and isolated and under pressure to separate yourself from the Moretti group as quickly as possible, which would require you to sign transfer documents to him, she finished, to entities he controls. She turned away and stood looking at the lobby door for a moment. Street side was dark and wet, a light rain coming down, the pavement orange lit. He knows about Nico, she said. Yes, she turned back. How much does he know? Lucian's face went very still. He knows where the apartment is. He knows your routine. He knows who Elena is and where she lives. Because of the device. Because of the device. And probably other surveillance I haven't found yet. He met her eyes. Serena, I think you need to— Don't, she said. Listen. If the next words out of your mouth are anything about what I need to do, I swear. I think Nico needs to be somewhere Caruso can't track, he said. Flat factual. Not a plea. Not because I'm telling you what to do. Because the man who installed that device has been building this for 3 years, and he's about to make a move, and when he moves, he's going to need your cooperation. And the easiest way to get a mother's cooperation is to demonstrate that he knows where her child is. The lobby air felt very thin. You're saying he'll threaten him, she said. I'm saying he's the kind of man who has already considered it. She went back upstairs and stood over Nico's portable crib for a long time. He was asleep on his back, arms thrown up on either side of his head the way newborns sleep, absolutely surrendered to it, his small chest rising and falling with that steady rhythm that she'd already memorized. The exact pace, the exact depth. She could tell in the dark, from across the room, whether it was right. It was right. She picked up the overnight bag she'd brought from the apartment already packed with 3 days of supplies, because she'd gotten into the habit of keeping it packed, because something in the back of her mind had been preparing for exactly this, without naming it. She carried Nico into the living room. Elena looked up from the couch. How much do you trust your friend in Connecticut? Serena asked. Elena didn't blink. With my life, how well does Lucian know her? He's never met her. I don't think I've ever mentioned her to him. And Caruso? No one knows about Diane except me and my college people. Serena held Nico against her shoulder. He didn't wake. I need you to call her tonight, Serena said. I need to know if we can come. Now? Tonight. Elena was already reaching for her phone. She called Marcus from Elena's landline at 11:45. I need you to stall the signing, she said. Whatever Caruso is expecting me to sign, whatever documents show up, whoever contacts you, stall. Tell them I'm emotionally compromised. Tell them I need time. Tell them anything. For how long? Long enough for me to understand exactly what I'm signing away and to whom. Serena's voice was careful. If Caruso realizes we're stalling, then he'll come to me directly, she said. And that's actually what I want. Marcus was quiet for a beat. You want him to show himself. I want to understand who I'm dealing with before I'm in a room with him. She paused. Can you find me everything there is on Danny Caruso? Not what Lucian's people know. Everything. Court records, business filings, anything public. I'll have it by morning. And Marcus, she hesitated. Keep this off any system Caruso might have access to. Paper only, he said immediately. Old school. Good. She hung up. The drive to Connecticut happened at 1 a.m, Elena behind the wheel of her personal car. Not a car anyone in the Moretti world would recognize, with Serena in the back seat and Nico in the infant seat beside her. The highway was mostly empty. Rain on the windshield. The heater running on high. Serena sat with her hand resting against Nico's car seat and tried to the suburbs thin out and tried to organize what she knew into something she could work with. Caruso had been running this for 3 years. He'd used Lucian's affair as a destabilizing mechanism. He'd orchestrated her access to documents her name. Her signature as the key to unlocking assets that Lucian would never have signed over directly. He'd installed surveillance to monitor her movements and her knowledge. And now he would be watching for the moment she was isolated enough, frightened enough, or pressured enough to do what he needed. What he hadn't counted on, what she suspected no one in this world had ever fully counted on, including Lucian, was what she actually was. She was not Lucian's wife. She was not a board position. She was not a signature waiting to be obtained. She was a woman who had spent 7 years learning how power moved through rooms, how decisions got made, how the architecture of an organization revealed its vulnerabilities to anyone willing to pay attention rather than just occupy a position within it. She'd paid attention. She'd always paid attention. She'd told herself it was just what you did when you were married to someone like Lucian. Just survival intelligence. Just staying oriented. But sitting in the back of Elena's car in the dark, with her son sleeping beside her, she understood that all of it had been preparation. She just hadn't known what for. Diane's house was outside Westport, back from the road, surrounded by old trees that blocked the nearest neighbor. She was 53, a former forensic accountant who'd left the corporate world 8 years ago and now ran a small organic farm with her wife and had no social media presence and paid cash for most things. Elena had known her since freshman year of college. She met them at the door in a robe with a flashlight and absolutely no drama about the hour. Spare rooms made up, she said, and stepped back to let them in. Nico didn't wake through any of it. Serena put him down in the middle of the spare bed with pillows on both sides and stood in the doorway and looked at him for a moment, and then went to the kitchen where Diane had put a kettle on. You okay? Diane asked. No, Serena said, but I'm working on it. Good enough. Diane set a mug in front of her. You don't have to tell me anything. You can just be here. I need to not be found for a few days. Then you won't be found. Diane said it, the way she'd probably said it about financial irregularities once matter of fact. No weight on it. A problem with a solution. Nobody comes down this road who isn't coming here specifically, and nobody comes here who isn't invited. Serena wrapped her hands around the mug. Someone's been listening to everything in my apartment, she said. Diane nodded slowly. They want me to sign some documents. And you're not going to sign them. Not until I understand exactly what I'd be signing away. Serena looked at her. And not until I figure out how to make that work for me instead of for them. Diane was quiet for a moment. You have any idea what you're up against? She asked. I'm starting to. Starting to isn't the same as knowing. No, Serena said. But it's more than I had a week ago. Outside the kitchen window, the rain had stopped, and the Connecticut countryside was very dark and very quiet. Somewhere out there, she knew, Caruso's people were running her phone records, checking her credit cards, trying to triangulate her location from the signals Elena's car might have left. She'd left her phone at Elena's apartment. She'd paid cash for the diapers and formula at the gas station on Route 7. She'd thought of it before she'd needed to think of it, which meant some part of her had been preparing for this. She just hadn't been ready to acknowledge what she was preparing for. Now she was. The call came to Elena's apartment at 7:43 the next morning, a number Elena had never seen, routed through what Marcus later confirmed was a prepaid device. Elena didn't answer. She called Serena immediately on the landline to Diane's house. He called. Elena said, Caruso? I don't know who it was. The number was clean. But the message he left Elena's voice was tight. Serena, he left a message saying he hopes you and Nico are comfortable and that he looks forward to speaking with you soon. The kitchen at Diane's house. Serena standing at the window with the phone against her ear. He hopes you and Nico are comfortable. He knew she'd moved. He knew she'd taken the baby. He might not know exactly where she was, but he knew she was gone. And he was letting her know that he knew. He was playing her fear like a frequency he'd already identified. That was the moment she stopped being frightened in the loose, reactive way she'd been frightened since finding the device. It condensed into something harder and colder and more specific. The difference between panic and clarity. I need Marcus to set up a meeting, she said, not with Caruso directly. Somewhere with legal witnesses and a recording device. Tell him I'm ready to discuss the documents. Elena was silent for a beat. You want him to think you're going to sign. I want him to come to me, Serena said. I want him in a room I've chosen, talking about what he needs and why, and I want every word recorded. She paused. He thinks I'm a frightened woman protecting her baby. He's going to keep thinking that. And what are you actually doing? Serena looked out the window at the wet Connecticut fields, the old trees, the gray November sky. I'm designing the room, she said. It was only after she hung up that she understood she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She wasn't reacting anymore. She wasn't surviving. She was building something strategy, leverage, a trap that looked like a negotiation. And the moment Caruso walked into whatever room she chose, the entire dynamic of the last 3 years was going to shift. He'd spent years positioning her as a piece on the board. She was about to show him that she'd been watching him move pieces the entire time. And she had a very different game in mind. This is a work of complete fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, locations, and events are entirely fictional. Marcus called at 9:17 the next morning with a voice that told her the paper file he'd promised was worse than either of them had anticipated. She was standing in Diane's kitchen with Nico in the crook of her left arm and a cup of coffee she hadn't touched going cold on the counter. Outside the window, the Connecticut fields were pale and flat under a sky the color of old concrete. She'd slept 3 hours. She knew because she'd counted them lying in the dark next to Nico, watching the ceiling, listening to the silence of a house that no one knew she was in. Talk to me, she said. Daniel Caruso, 54 years old. Born in Providence, Rhode Island. Father was a mid-level figure in the Rossetti organization out of Boston until he was killed in 9,987. Marcus paused. Danny was 19. He spent the next 6 years doing small work for various organizations before Lucian's father brought him in as a numbers man in 9,999. He's been with Moretti ever since. 24 years, she said. 24 years. And in that time, by my count, he has outlasted 3 underbosses, 2 federal investigations, and 1 internal reorganizations that resulted in 4 men going to prison. Another pause. None of them were Danny Caruso. She understood what Marcus was saying without him saying it. Men like that didn't survive through luck. They survived because they were better at reading rooms than the people who occupied them. They survived because they planned further ahead than anyone else thought necessary. They survived because by the time anyone understood what was happening, it had already happened. The shell companies, she said. 17 of them that I've found so far, spread across Delaware, Nevada, and 3 offshore jurisdictions. The movement of assets through them has been consistent and small enough to avoid automatic flagging, large enough to accumulate into something significant over 3 years. He paused again, and this pause had weight to it. Serena, the total I'm looking at is somewhere between $40 and $60 million, possibly more. She set the coffee mug down carefully. And my name, she said, appears on the founding documents of 4 of those companies. In 2 cases, your signature appears on transfer authorizations. In both cases, the transfers were to entities that could flow into Caruso-controlled accounts. I never signed those documents, I know. Marcus, I know, he said firmly. The signatures are forgeries. Good ones, but forgeries. I've had them looked at by 2 people this morning. Paper only, no digital trail. They're not yours. He let that sit for a moment. But a federal investigator looking at a broad financial picture of the Moretti organization wouldn't necessarily know that without a very detailed forensic examination, which is not usually what happens in the initial stages of an investigation. She understood she was already in the frame, not because she'd done anything, because someone had spent months constructing a version of events in which she looked like a willing participant. Her name, her companies, her forged signature, all of it, pointing at a woman who had access to the legitimate side of the Moretti organization and had used that access to move money. He was going to use the real signatures to finish it, she said quietly. The documents he wants me to sign now would complete the transfer, and at that point, the forged ones and the real ones would blend into a continuous record, a narrative of participation. He'd have leverage over me, she said, not just over Lucian. Leverage or a fall position. If the federal investigation moved faster than he planned, he could point to you as the architect of the financial structure, distance himself. You'd be the one holding everything. The kitchen was very quiet. Nico made a small sound against her shoulder, and she adjusted him automatically, her hand moving to his back without thought. He's thorough, she said. He's been doing this for 3 years, Marcus said. The level of patience involved it's significant. Can we use the forgeries? Against him, yes. But only if we can demonstrate they're forgeries in a way that's legally usable. Which means we need access to the originals, a certified forensic document examiner, and ideally he stopped. A witness, she said. Someone with first-hand knowledge of the scheme. Someone inside the organization who can speak to what Caruso has been building. She thought about that. I have to get him talking, she said. That's what I was going to say. Set up the meeting, Marcus. Tell him I'm ready to discuss the documents. Tell him I want to understand what I'm signing before I sign it. Make it sound like a woman who is scared and practical and has decided that cooperating is safer than running. And when he's in the room, I'll handle what happens in the room. Lucian called 20 minutes later on Diane's landline, which meant Elena had given him the number, which meant he'd asked Elena for it, which meant he was more rattled than she'd heard in his voice 2 nights ago in the lobby. She answered because she'd decided that Lucian was not the enemy, and she needed every resource that wasn't. Caruso knows you left the apartment, he said immediately. I know. He called Elena's number and left a message. What did he say, she told him. She heard his breath change. Not quite a sharp intake, something more controlled than that, but the control itself was a tell. He's accelerating, Lucian said. Why? Because someone made a call to the Southern District 2 days ago. An anonymous tip about Moretti financial accounts. It wasn't me. A pause. My people traced it back to a prepaid device bought in Brooklyn 6 weeks ago. Caruso's timing this to the federal investigation. He wants the transfers complete before the feds start pulling threads. The picture shifted. Not just Caruso building leverage against Lucian, building a fall position using Serena's name. He was timing his exit from the Moretti organization entirely. He was going to take the money, complete the transfers, and then either disappear or position himself as a cooperative witness with a story already constructed about who had actually moved the money. He's going to run, she said. Once he has what he needs, yes. And what he needs is my signature. Yes, Lucian. She shifted Nico to her other arm. I need you to answer me something honestly. Okay. How much of what Caruso knows about me, my routines, Elena, Marcus, how much of that could he have gotten from you? Not intentionally, just from proximity, from things you said. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Some of it, he said. She closed her eyes briefly. He's been in my house, Lucian said. He sat at my table. I've talked about you in front of him, the way you talk about family in front of someone you trust. His voice was flat and precise, the way it got when he was being rigorously honest and hating it. I handed him the map. I didn't know that's what I was doing. But I did it. I know, she said. I'm sorry, I know that too. She opened her eyes. Marcus is setting up a meeting with Caruso. I'm going to get him talking. I need to know, does he have any reason to believe you and I are in contact right now? No. As far as his information goes, you filed for divorce, you've moved out, and we're not communicating outside of what goes through lawyers. Good, keep it that way. She paused. Don't do anything. Don't move against him. Don't tip him off. Let him think he's on schedule. Serena, I mean it, Lucian. If you move too early and he goes to ground, we lose everything. The forgeries, the evidence, the leverage. He disappears with the money, and my name stays on those documents. Another silence. Okay, he said. I'll tell you when it's time. She hung up and stood in Diane's kitchen and thought about the meeting she was about to arrange and what she'd need to walk into it, and how much of what she was planning she was actually capable of executing under pressure. She'd never done anything like this. She'd been a corporate lawyer. She'd been a mob wife, which was its own skill set, but a passive one observation and endurance and the careful management of what you knew and didn't say. She'd never been the one designing the play. She thought about Caruso, 54 years old, 24 years of survival, a man who had outlasted everyone around him through patience and architecture and the absolute conviction that he was smarter than the people he was working with. He probably was smarter than most of them. The question was whether he'd made the mistake that every very smart person eventually makes, assuming that the people he'd underestimated were actually less capable than he'd calculated. The meeting was set for Thursday. Marcus arranged it through a law firm in Midtown, neutral ground, conference room, legal witnesses available in the adjacent office. He told Caruso's intermediary that Serena Vale Moretti wanted to discuss the documentation before signing, that she had questions about what she was being asked to authorize, and that she was prepared to move forward once those questions were answered. The intermediary called back within the hour. Caruso would attend personally. That told her something. He wasn't delegating this because he couldn't afford to. He was attending because he wanted to be in the room when she signed. He wanted to watch it happen. That was vanity, the specific vanity of a man who'd spent 3 years building something, and wanted the satisfaction of seeing it close. She was counting on that vanity. Wednesday night, in the spare room at Diane's house with Nico asleep beside her and a yellow legal pad on her knees, she wrote down everything she knew. Not in any strategic order. Just everything: dates, names, amounts, the timeline Marcus had constructed, the sequence of events as she now understood them. She wrote it all out in longhand and then read it back twice and found the gaps. There were still gaps. She didn't know exactly how Caruso planned to route the final transfers. She didn't know which federal investigator he'd tipped. She didn't know whether Bianca Russo was a knowing participant or someone who'd been used as thoroughly as Serena herself had been used. She picked up the phone. She called Lucian again. Bianca, she said when he answered. Is she still in contact with your people? A beat. The particular discomfort of a man being asked about his former mistress by his wife. She's been trying to reach me, he said carefully. Has she reached you? No, I need you to reach her. She kept her voice completely even. I need to know how Caruso brought her in, what she was told, what she knew about the bigger picture. You want me to talk to Bianca. I want you to find out whether she's a witness or co-conspirator. Because if she's a witness and she doesn't know it yet, she's useful. And if she's a co-conspirator, I need to know that before I walk into a room with Caruso. He was quiet for a moment. I'll make contact, he said. Don't tell her about the meeting. Understood. She paused. When you talk to her, don't be angry with her. He didn't say anything. If Caruso used her the way I think he did, she's not the person you need to be angry with. A pause. I need her honest. Angry people don't give you honest. You're remarkably calm about this, he said. Not quite an accusation. Something more complicated. I'm furious, she said. I'm just saving it. Thursday arrived gray and cold, the kind of November morning that sat on your chest like weight. Elena drove her and Diane staying with Nico, a fact that Serena had spent 2 days making peace with, the physical reality of walking into a room without her son on her arm for the first time since the hospital. She wore gray, not because she'd strategized it, because it was what she put on without thinking, and then looked at in the mirror and understood was right. Nothing expensive. Nothing that announced Lucian Moretti's wife. A woman who had been through something and was trying to hold herself together. That was the character she was playing, and it wasn't entirely a performance. Marcus met her in the lobby. He's already upstairs, Marcus said quietly. Arrived 10 minutes ago. He brought one man, stayed in the lobby. Just one? He's confident. She thought about that as they rode the elevator. Confident meant he didn't feel threatened. Didn't feel threatened meant he believed she was exactly what he'd constructed her to be. A frightened woman in a collapsing marriage, under financial pressure, with a newborn to protect, who had done the math and decided cooperation was survival. Let him keep thinking that. The conference room was on the 14th floor. Large table, city view, the neutral beige of a space designed to be nobody's territory. Marcus had arranged for a recording device built into his briefcase legal in New York, under single consent, and a court reporter in the adjacent office on standby. Danny Caruso was standing at the window when they walked in. He was smaller than she'd expected. She'd built a mental image from 3 years of hearing his name and passing. Caruso handled it. Caruso's people confirmed. Caruso signed off, and she'd imagined someone physically imposing. He was maybe 5'9", neat, in a dark suit that fit well. Gray at the temples. The kind of face that didn't hold strong expression, that gave you the impression of attention without revealing what was being paid attention to. He turned when she came in and smiled. Not warmly, but competently. The smile of a man who practiced it. "Mrs. Moretti," he said. "Miss Vale," she said. "I've gone back to my name." A small acknowledgement from him. A nod. He gestured toward the chairs as though it were his room. She sat across from him and put her hands flat on the table and looked at him with the expression she'd been practicing, tired, wary, a woman at the end of something who has decided that endurance is better than resistance. "I appreciate you meeting me," he said. "I have questions about the documents before I'll sign anything." Of course. He opened a folder in front of him. "These are the transfer authorizations for the 4 Moretti Group subsidiaries listed under your name. Signing them will transfer your board position and signatory authority to a holding company that will manage the assets independently of the Moretti family interests going forward." He slid the papers across the table. "Given the divorce, this is actually in your interest. It separates you cleanly from any Moretti organizational liability." She looked at the papers without picking them up. "Which holding company?" she asked. "Greystone Capital Associates, a Delaware entity." "Who controls Greystone Capital Associates?" The competent smile didn't change. "It's a management structure."
"Several principals."
"I'd like the names of the principals," she said. "I can have that documentation sent to Mr. Chen. I'd like them now." She met his eyes. "I'm not signing documents that transfer assets to an entity I can't identify the principals of. That's just basic due diligence. My signature, my responsibility." He looked at her for a moment, recalibrating. The smile stayed in place, but something behind it was working. "I appreciate the caution," he said. "The principals include myself and 2 colleagues. We've managed Moretti Group assets for years. The transition is designed to... You're a principal of Greystone Capital." "One of several, yes." "Mr. Caruso." She kept her voice very level. "I'm going to ask you something directly, and I'd like a direct answer." He waited. "These 4 subsidiaries, how long have they been used to route money through accounts that aren't directly connected to the Moretti Group's declared holdings?" The smile left his face. Not quickly. It dissolved over about 2 seconds, which was actually impressive control, and what replaced it was not anger. Not yet, but the specific attentiveness of a man who has just realized the room he's in is different from the room he thought he entered. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said. "I think you are." She kept her hands flat. She could feel her pulse in her wrists, pressing against the table surface, but her voice was coming out even. "I think you've been using these companies as a pipeline for asset transfers for approximately 3 years. I think those transfers have moved somewhere between $40 and $60 million into entities you control. And I think the documents you want me to sign are the final step in a process that you've been building since before I was pregnant." Silence in the room. Marcus hadn't moved. Caruso looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in him, a decision being made somewhere behind his eyes, and he sat back in his chair. "You've been talking to Lucian," he said. "I've been talking to my attorney. Lucian gave you this." "The forensic document examiner gave me this," she said. "The one who looked at the transfer authorizations bearing my signature. The ones I didn't sign." The temperature in the room dropped. "I don't know what documents you're referring to," he said, completely flat now, all pretense of the competent smile gone. "The ones with my forged signature authorizing the first 2 rounds of transfers. The ones that establish a pattern of participation so that when I sign these..." She gestured at the papers without touching them. It looks like a continuation of willing involvement rather than coercion. He looked at her. She looked back. "You're smarter than I expected," he said. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment, delivered without inflection, the way you'd note a variable you'd failed to account for in a calculation. "I know," she said. "This doesn't change what you're going to do." She felt the bottom drop out of her stomach, but she kept her face still. "Tell me why." "'Cause I know where your son is." The room went absolutely silent. Diane Kowalski, Westport, Connecticut. The farm off Bayberry Lane. He watched her face. "You dropped off the grid quite well. Paid cash, left your phone, didn't use any Moretti-associated contacts. Very competent." A pause. "But you drove in your sister's car, and your sister's car has a GPS unit that's been logging location data to a cloud account for 2 years. It took my people about 4 hours. She could not breathe. She kept breathing anyway. She forced it in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way they'd taught her in the labor breathing classes she'd attended alone because Lucian had been in a meeting that week, too. If anything happens to my son," she started. "Nothing is going to happen to your son," Caruso said. Not warmly, not as a reassurance, as a statement of operational fact. "Nothing needs to happen to him. You're going to sign these documents, and then you're going to go back to Connecticut and pick him up and start your life, and in 6 months, none of this will be relevant to you personally." He leaned forward slightly. "Or you can keep running this play, and I'll need to take steps to ensure your cooperation that neither of us wants. It really is that simple." She stared at him. He stared back. And she understood in that moment, with complete clarity, with the particular cold that comes not from fear but from the recognition that your calculation was wrong. That she had walked into this room believing she was designing the trap, and Caruso had known she was coming and had let her walk in anyway. Because he'd already closed the exits. She reached for the pen. Marcus put his hand on her arm. She looked at him. His face said, "Don't." She looked back at Caruso. "I need 5 minutes," she said, "to review the documents." "Take 10, he said, and stood and walked to the window, his back to her. The Manhattan skyline gray and enormous behind him. She looked at the papers. Her hands were shaking barely, just enough that she could feel it in her fingertips. She pressed them harder against the table. She thought about Nico. 6 pounds 4 ounces. Small fists clenched even in sleep. Diane's house, the farm. Her son in a portable crib with pillows on both sides. She thought about the GPS unit in Elena's car that she hadn't thought to check because she hadn't thought to think about it. And the 4 hours it had taken Caruso's people to run it down. And the fact that she'd spent 2 days believing she was invisible when she was in fact exactly where he'd calculated she would go. She thought about the forged signatures and the shell companies, and the 3 years of patience, and the man standing at the window who had watched a marriage dissolve, and a woman try to escape and had simply waited because he'd known she would eventually come to him. And then something happened that she hadn't planned and hadn't rehearsed. She stopped being scared, not because the threat wasn't real. It was real, it was very real. She stopped being scared because the fear had nowhere left to go. She'd reached the edge of it, the absolute limit, and on the other side of the limit was something else entirely. Something colder and quieter and far more useful. She looked at the papers. She looked at the pen in her hand. She looked at Caruso's back, and she thought, he came here to watch me sign. He needed to be in the room. He didn't need to be in the room for the signature. He could have sent the documents through Marcus. He's here because he wanted to see it. Because after 3 years he wanted to be present for the moment it closed. That's the vanity. That's the thing he couldn't control. He was in this room, away from whatever operational structure he had built around Nico's location, because he'd wanted the satisfaction of watching her break. She looked at Marcus. She picked up the pen. She held it over the first signature line. And then she looked up at Caruso and said, "Before I sign this, I need to know one thing." He turned from the window. "Bianca Russo," she said. Did she know? About the forgeries, the transfers, all of it. Did she know what she was part of? Something moved across his face. So quick she almost missed it. Not guilt, nothing as simple as guilt. Calculation, he was deciding what answer served him. She knew enough, he said. What does that mean? It means she understood what she was doing and why. Serena looked at him. No, she said. She didn't. He blinked. I know she didn't, Serena said, because Lucian spoke to her yesterday. And she told him everything. She paused. Including the fact that you told her the affair was a business arrangement. That she was protecting her family. That Lucian needed the distraction because he was planning to cut her out of an arrangement she'd inherited from her father. She watched his face. She thought she was protecting herself from Lucian. She had no idea she was protecting you from him. The calculation in Caruso's face ran faster now. You used her, Serena said. The same way you used me. The same way you've been using everyone. She kept her voice very flat. And she's prepared to say so. That's not, he stopped, in a sworn statement, which Marcus filed with the Southern District this morning. She set the pen down. Before this meeting, the room was absolutely still. Caruso looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back with the specific expression of a man who has 9 hours of negotiating experience and no inclination to blink. The forensic document examination, Serena said. The transfer records. The shell company structures. Bianca Russo's statement. She folded her hands. And this conversation, which has been recorded since the moment we sat down. Caruso's jaw tightened. The first real physical tell she'd seen from him. You came in here planning to sign, he said. I came in here planning to get you talking, she said. Those are different things. I told you where your son is. You told me you know where he is, she said. And in about 45 seconds, the 2 federal agents who've been in the office next door since 8 this morning are going to come through that door, and then we'll find out what you actually have the ability to do about it. The door opened. Not 45 seconds. Serena had miscounted. More like 30. 2 agents. Credentials out. The court reporter following them in with her transcript. Caruso stood very still at the window. He looked at Serena. You had this before you walked in, he said. No, she said honestly. I had half of it. Bianca's statement came in last night later than I wanted. I didn't know if it was going to be enough. She held his gaze. I was still working on the second half when you told me where my son was. That was the tell, he said slowly. Not a question. He was reconstructing it. You needed me scared enough to sign immediately. If you'd had someone physically at the farm, I wouldn't have had time to think. You told me from across a conference table because you wanted to watch me break. She paused. You gave me 30 seconds to realize that you were still here, not there. And 30 seconds was enough. He said nothing. The agents moved toward him. He didn't run. She hadn't expected him to men like Caruso didn't run in conference rooms. They ran in the architecture of months and years, in the careful construction of distances and exits. When the room finally closed around them, they went still. He went still. And Serena Vale sat at the table with her hands folded and watched Daniel Caruso understand that the woman he'd spent 3 years treating as a signature on a document had been paying attention the entire time. The agent asked him to stand. He stood. He looked at Serena one more time before they moved him toward the door. No anger. No threat. Something closer to professional acknowledgement, the look of someone who is lost and is already rearranging his thinking for the next stage. You'll still have a problem, he said. The forged signatures are in federal systems now. Cleaning that up is my next problem, she said. Not yours. They took him out. The door closed. The room was silent except for the court reporter's equipment, and Marcus breathing beside her, and the distant sound of the city 14 floors below. Serena sat for a long moment. Then she put her head down on her folded arms on the conference table and stayed there, very still, while something enormous that she'd been holding for 4 days finally released. She didn't cry, she just breathed. Marcus put his hand on her shoulder. It's not over, he said quietly. I know, she said into her arms. The federal exposure from the forged documents. I know, Marcus. And Lucian, whatever he decides to do with the ledger. I know. She lifted her head. Her eyes were dry. Her face felt like it had been pressed against something cold for a very long time. I know it's not over, but right now. She looked at the phone in her hand. Right now, I need to call Diane and make sure my son is okay. She dialed. Diane picked up on the second ring. He's fine, Diane said before Serena could speak. He's been asleep for 2 hours. We're good. Serena closed her eyes. Okay, she'd said. I'll be there by 3. She hung up. She looked at Marcus. Tell me about the forged signatures, she said. Tell me exactly what we need to clean it up and who we need to talk to. He opened his briefcase. She straightened in her chair, put both hands flat on the table, and went back to work because Caruso had been right about one thing. The federal exposure from those documents was real, and it was still her name on them, and the arrest of Danny Caruso did not make that problem disappear. It just made it hers to solve. And the woman sitting at that table, in that gray suit, in that rented conference room 14 floors above Manhattan, the woman who had lost her marriage and her sense of safety and 3 years of carefully maintained blindness, had stopped waiting for someone else to solve her problems somewhere around. The moment she'd closed a door on a man with an expensive bracelet and walked back to her son. She was still that woman. She was just a different version of her now, one who knew how to build the room. This is a work of complete fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, locations, and events are entirely fictional. The federal agents were gone by 4. Caruso was processed, printed, and sitting in a holding room at the Southern District Field Office by the time Serena walked out of the Midtown building into cold air that hit her face like a hand. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in the exhaust and the cold and the particular smell of New York in November, and felt the specific hollowness that comes after extreme sustained tension releases all at once. Marcus walked out behind her. "Agent Reyes wants a meeting," he said. "Tomorrow morning." She's the lead on the Moretti financial investigation. "I know," Serena said. She'd recognized the name from the documents Marcus had pulled. "Tell her 9 o'clock. She's going to want to talk about your role in the subsidiary companies." "I know that too, Serena." He stopped beside her on the sidewalk. "Tomorrow's meeting is not Caruso. Reyes has been building a case for 18 months. She's not going to be satisfied with what we gave her today. She's going to want the full picture of the Moretti organization." She looked at him. "I know," she said for the 3rd time. "I'll handle it." She called Elena. Then she called Diane. Then she stood beside Elena's car while Elena drove in circles, looking for parking, and she looked at her phone and thought about Lucian. He needed to know about Reyes. She called him. He picked up before the first ring finished. "Caruso's in custody," she said. She heard him exhale. Not relief, something more complicated than relief. The specific sound of a man absorbing news that solves one problem while clarifying the size of the one behind it. "Federal?" he asked. "Southern District?" They had the transfer records, the forensic document analysis, Bianca's statement. She paused. "And the recording from today. How much did he say?" "Enough." She watched a cab cut across 3 lanes of traffic without signaling. "Lucian, the federal investigation into the Moretti accounts Reyes has been building it for 18 months. Caruso tipped them, but the investigation is broader than what he gave them. She's going to want everything." Silence. "I meet with her tomorrow," Serena said. "My exposure from the forged documents, Marcus thinks we can clean it up if I cooperate fully, and the forgery evidence is solid." "But your exposure is mine to handle," he said. "I know. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what's coming, so you're not blindsided. I know what's coming." His voice was very quiet. "I've known for a while what it was going to look like at the end of this." She thought about that, the particular tone of it. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I've been thinking about what I'm willing to do," he said, "and what I owe, and what Nico should inherit from me." She stood very still on the sidewalk. "Lucian, go get your son," he said. "We'll talk when you're back." He hung up. She stared at the phone. Elena's car appeared around the corner. Serena got in and they drove to Connecticut, and she held Nico for 40 minutes straight without putting him down, and he didn't complain, and she kept her face in his hair and tried not to think about what Lucian's voice had sounded like at the end of that call. She was back in Manhattan by 10 that night. Nico was asleep in the apartment, not the penthouse, a 2-bedroom in Tribeca that Marcus had found on short notice, a place that was hers and had no history and no devices installed in the baseboards. The specialist had swept it the morning she'd moved in. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and Marcus's file on Agent Reyes when Lucian knocked. She'd told Elena not to come. She'd told Marcus she'd call him in the morning. She'd wanted one night that was quiet. Lucian's knock was 3 times evenly spaced. She recognized it. She let him in. He looked like he hadn't slept since she'd called from Elena's lobby 2 nights ago. His jacket was wrong. Not disheveled. Lucian didn't do disheveled, but wearing itself differently, like the body inside it had changed shape slightly. His face was the face of a man who has been working a problem for days and has arrived at an answer he didn't want. She stepped back and let him in and closed the door, and they stood in her kitchen with the overhead light between them. "Tell me what you've decided," she said. He looked around the kitchen, not avoiding her, just taking in the space. The apartment. The absence of everything that had been the penthouse. "I have a ledger," he said. She waited. Red cover. 11 years of Moretti organizational records. Financial transactions, operational details, names, dates, everything. He looked at her. Enough to dismantle the entire structure. Not just the financial side, everything. Her stomach dropped. "You've had it," she said. "I always had it." He sat down at the kitchen table without being invited. She sat across from him. "It was the insurance policy, the thing that kept the other families from moving against us. If I went down, the ledger went public and took everyone with me. Mutually assured of destruction. And now? Now Caruso has been arrested using evidence that came partly from my organization." He put his hands flat on the table, the same gesture she made. She noticed. She'd never noticed that before. The Southern District is going to build outward from what they have. My name is already in the preliminary materials. It's a matter of months before they come at me directly. So you give them the ledger first, she said. I give them everything, he said. All of it. Not just the ledger, the accounts, the structure, the operational details. Everything they need to close this completely. He paused. And I don't ask for immunity. She stared at him. I don't ask for Lucian. If you cooperate without requesting immunities, I go to prison, he said. Yes. The kitchen was completely quiet. I know what I'm saying, he said. I've thought about it for 2 weeks. Since Nico was born, he looked at her hands on the table. I've thought about what kind of world he grows up in. If I spend the next 10 years fighting a federal case, maneuvering, protecting the organization, doing what I've always done. And I've thought about what kind of man I want him to have access to when he's old enough to decide whether he wants any access at all. She felt something move in her chest. Not forgiveness, she was nowhere near forgiveness. Something more structural than that. Recognition of something real. This doesn't fix what happened, she said. I know. It doesn't fix the affair. It doesn't fix Sicily. It doesn't fix the 7 years of I know. His voice was quiet and entirely without defense. I'm not doing this to fix us. There's no us to fix. I'm doing it because my son is 6 weeks old and he has my name, and everything attached to my name is eventually going to find him. And I'd rather hand the federal government everything I have than let that machinery follow him through his life. She looked at him for a long time. When, she said. I called Reyes tonight before I came here. He met her eyes. She's expecting me tomorrow at 7, before your 9 o'clock meeting. You already called her. I wanted you to know it was real before you walked in there. He paused. So you knew exactly what the situation was. So you could make your choices with accurate information. She looked at the man across her kitchen table. Tired, certain, wearing a jacket that fit wrong. The most powerful man she'd ever known, in the process of giving away every source of that power voluntarily. You're going to prison, she said. Probably 3 to 5 years with cooperation. Maybe more, he didn't look away. I'll write to him. If you allow it. I'm not asking for anything. I just want him to know at some point that there was a version of me that made the right call. She pressed her lips together. I'll allow letters, she said. He nodded once. Stood up, Serena. He stopped at the kitchen doorway. His back was to her. The bracelet at the hospital. I know it was. I know there's nothing I could have brought that would have. No, she said, I know. He didn't turn around. I just needed to say it was a stupid thing to bring. I knew it when I picked it up. I brought it anyway because I didn't know what else to do, and I wanted to do something. She looked at his back. Go meet with Reyes, she said. Do what you said you're going to do. He walked out. She sat at the kitchen table alone for a long time. Then she went to check on Nico. She was in Reyes' office by 9 the next morning, and Reyes was everything the file suggested: compact, 50, with eyes that moved fast, and a stillness that came from 20 years of watching people decide whether to lie. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Serena told her everything. The forged signatures, the shell companies, the device in the apartment, the meeting with Caruso, all of it, with Marcus beside her and a recording running and a clarity that surprised even her, the way extremely disturbing things sometimes become easier to describe once they're over. Reyes listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of discipline. At the end, Reyes set down her pen. Your name comes off the preliminary materials, she said. Given the forgery evidence and your cooperation, your exposure is manageable. A pause. Your husband met with me this morning, I know. He gave us the ledger. Serena nodded. He also made a statement that exonerates you completely from any organizational involvement. Detailed, corroborated, thorough. Reyes looked at her carefully. He's going to plead guilty. I know that too. You're not surprised. No. Reyes studied her. Most people in your position would be working to negotiate a deal. Keep assets, minimize damage, not most people in my position, Serena said. And I don't want the assets. I want my name clean and I want to raise my son. She met Reyes' eyes. Tell me what I need to do to make both of those things happen. Reyes told her. 3 weeks after Danny Caruso's arrest, 2 things happened on the same day. The first was that Lucian Moretti formally submitted a guilty plea to federal financial crimes, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice charges. His cooperation agreement was substantial and his sentencing would take months to finalize, but the plea was entered, and the Moretti organizational structure began its rapid, irreversible collapse as the ledger's contents moved through the Southern District. The second thing was that a man named Vincent Colt, who worked for an associate of Caruso's, and who had been sitting outside Diane's Connecticut property on and off for 3 weeks, decided that Caruso's arrest meant his employment was terminated and his best option was to complete the job he'd been paid for before the arrest became a liability. He made this decision on a Wednesday afternoon. He drove to the farm off Bayberry Lane. He got through the front gate because the lock was the kind that looked substantial, but wasn't. Diane had been meaning to replace it for a year, and he was up the driveway and at the front door before the motion. Sensor camera triggered its alert to Diane's phone. Diane was in the barn. Serena was in the city. Nico was inside, asleep, in the care of Elena's friend from college who'd been staying at the farm for the past week as an extra set of hands. The friend, 28 years old, a kindergarten teacher named Ruth, heard the knock and looked through the peephole and saw a man she didn't recognize in a work jacket holding what appeared to be a clipboard. She didn't open the door. She called Diane. Diane looked at her phone in the barn and saw the camera alert and the call coming in simultaneously and went cold all over and started running. Serena's phone rang at 2:17 in the afternoon. She was in Marcus's office reviewing a document. She looked at the screen Diane's number and picked up. "There's a man at the front door," Diane said. She was out of breath, running. "I don't know who he is. Ruth hasn't opened it. I'm coming up from the barn." Serena was already standing. "Don't approach him," she said. "Call 911. Right now. Put me on hold and call 911. Serena Diane, 911. Now she heard the line go to hold. She looked at Marcus and said, "I need your car keys." "What? Give me your car keys right now." She was in the elevator before she understood that she was shaking. Not fear, something rawer than fear. Something that bypassed the thinking part of her brain entirely and went straight to muscle. Her son was in that house. Her 6-week-old son was in a farmhouse in Connecticut, and a man she didn't know was at the door, and she was in Manhattan. She called Lucian from the elevator. He picked up immediately. "There's someone at Diane's house," she said. Her voice came out completely flat, which surprised her. "I'm driving there now. I heard you," he said. She could already hear movement on his end. "Marco's 20 minutes from Westport. I'll send him now. Marky's clean. He's been out of the organization since the plea. He's just a man with a car." A pause. "Serena, drive carefully." She got into Marcus's car. She drove. She didn't drive carefully. She drove the way she'd breathed through contractions, focused, rhythmic, refusing to let the worst versions of the images forming in her head take full shape, because if they did, she would stop being functional, and functional was what Nico needed. Diane called back at 2:24. "Police are on their way," Diane said. She was at the house now, could hear a door, footsteps. "The man at the door is gone. He left when he heard me coming up from the barn." Serena's hands tightened on the wheel. "Is Ruth okay?" "She's okay. She's shaken, but she's okay. Nico's asleep. He didn't wake up through any of it." She breathed. "I'm still coming," she said. "I know." She was in Westport by 3:45. The police had come and gone, no one to arrest, no law broken technically, a man at a door who'd left when approached. The description matched no one in any immediate system. Marco arrived at 3:58 in a civilian car, a big quiet man she'd never actually spoken to directly. He stood in Diane's kitchen and looked at Serena with the specific expression of someone who has been in enough dangerous situations to be able to assess one quickly. "He'll try again," Marco said. "I know. Caruso's people aren't organized enough to have a backup plan, but individual contractors." "I know." She was holding Nico. She'd picked him up the moment she walked in and she wasn't putting him down. "This isn't over just because Caruso's arrested." "No," Marco said. "It's not." She looked at him. "Can you stay?" she asked. He nodded once. No negotiation, no conditions. Vincent Colt was identified by the police from the motion camera footage 48 hours later. He had a record assault, extortion, 2 conspiracy charges that had been pled down, and he was picked up at a motel outside Bridgeport the following morning. He talked immediately. He confirmed that he'd been contracted by a Caruso associate to obtain the cooperation of Serena Vele Moretti by demonstrating that her son's location was not secure. Not to hurt anyone. To demonstrate. The distinction seemed important to him. Reyes, when Serena reported this to her, said the distinction was meaningless under federal law. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't the end of it. 4 weeks after Caruso's arrest, 4 weeks after Lucian's plea, 4 weeks after Vincent Colt's arrest and the supposed dismantling of the operational threat, Serena received a phone call from a blocked number at 11 at night. She was in the Tribeca apartment. Nico was asleep. Marco was staying in the building. Lucian was covering his rent, which she'd allowed on the specific grounds that she was not paying for it herself, and it was protection for her son, not for her. And those were different things. "The blocked number," she answered. A woman's voice, younger than she expected. Ms. Yes. My name is Carla Fenn. I work for a man named Richard Doss. You don't know that name. A pause. Mr. Doss was Danny Caruso's partner in the Greystone structure. Not on any document. Not in any filing. The voice was careful and fast, the voice of someone who has been holding something for too long and has decided to let it go. He wasn't arrested with Caruso because his name isn't anywhere. That was by design. Serena was completely still. Why are you calling me? She said. Because Mr. Doss has decided that the situation has changed since Caruso's arrest and the Moretti plea, and he's concluded that the most efficient path forward is to complete the original objective through. The voice stopped, recalibrated. He's not going to stop with Vincent Colt. That was a message. There's a second contractor. I don't know his name. I just know he exists, and his instructions are different from Colt's. Different how? Silence for 2 seconds. The original objective was your signature, the woman said. The documents are useless now. The accounts have been frozen. The structure Caruso built is finished. Another pause. The second contractor's objective is to eliminate the witness who can connect Doss to the Greystone structure. The air went out of the room. You, Serena said. And you, the woman said. You're the one who brought in the forensic document analysis and the recording. You're the cleanest line between the structure and the federal case. The voice was very controlled. She was terrified. Serena could hear it under the control. I work for Doss. I've worked for him for 6 years. But I have a daughter, and I'm not going to... Where is Doss now? Serena asked. He's in the city. He arrived yesterday. Does he know you're calling me? No. Are you somewhere safe? For the next hour, maybe. Serena looked at the closed door of Nico's room. She thought about what she'd said to Elena in the hospital. I'm figuring out where we go from here. That's what I'm doing. She thought about the conference room. Caruso's back at the window. The 30 seconds between knowing and acting. She thought about a man named Richard Doss, who had not been in any document, by design, who had arrived in Manhattan yesterday, whose name was not in any filing. She thought about how far she'd come from the woman who'd found a device in her baseboard and called Marcus from a payphone. Listen to me, she said to Carla Fenn. I need you to do exactly what I tell you for the next 60 minutes. You called me because you want a way out, Serena said. I'm going to give you one. But you have to trust me for 60 minutes. Can you do that? A pause that felt very long. Yes, the woman said. Serena pulled up Marcus's number with her thumb. She was already moving toward the window to check the street below habit, the instinct she'd developed since Connecticut when she saw it. A car parked across from the building, dark sedan. Had been there since she'd looked at 9. Still there now at 11. Different position than before. Closer to the entrance. Her pulse spiked. She stepped back from the window. Carla, she said. The second contractor, does Doss work fast? When he decides something, yes. She looked at the closed door of Nico's room. She looked at the window. She looked at the phone in her hand. She had 60 seconds to decide whether she was going to call Reyes, call Marco, call Lucian, get Nico and run, or stay and turn this into a different kind of room than the one Richard Doss was building. She had 60 seconds, and the cars across the street hadn't moved, and Nico was asleep 8 feet away, and a woman named Carla Fenn was on the other end of the phone with a daughter, and 6 years of knowledge about a man whose name was not in any document by design. She made the call, not Reyes, not Marcus, Lucian. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. There's a car across from my building, she said. Dark sedan. And a man named Richard Doss arrived in Manhattan yesterday. He's Caruso's hidden partner, and he's decided I'm a liability. Her voice was absolutely even. She could not afford anything else. I have his associate on another line. She wants out. If I can get her talking on record in the next hour. I'm coming, Lucian said. Lucian, I'm not asking. His voice had dropped into that operational frequency. I'm 20 minutes away. Lock your door, get away from the windows, and keep Caruso's woman on the line. A pause. Marco is in the building? 6th floor. Call him now. Tell him about the car. Tell him not to approach it, just watch it. Okay, Serena. His voice changed for 1 second. Just one. Is Nico okay? He's asleep. Back to operational. 20 minutes, she called Marco. She went back to Carla Fenn. She moved to the kitchen, away from the windows, and sat on the floor with her back against the cabinet and her son's door visible from where she sat, and she talked to a frightened woman on a block number and built the next 60 minutes out of whatever she had. The car across the street didn't move. Marco watched it from the 6th floor. Lucian drove through Manhattan at 11 at night with his jaw set and his hands at 10 and 2, and something in his chest that had been building since 6:47 in the morning 6 weeks ago when his son came into the world without him. He wasn't going to be late again. He wasn't going to say not yet to anything that mattered. He pushed the car harder and watched the lights of the city blur past and thought about a woman sitting on a kitchen floor with her back to a cabinet, talking a stranger through the most frightening hour of her life, keeping her voice steady because her son was asleep 8 feet away and she had decided somewhere between a baseboard device and a conference room recording and a drive to Connecticut at 100 miles an hour that she was done waiting for. Powerful men to protect the things that mattered to her. He thought about what it had cost her to become that woman. He thought about his part in the cost. He drove faster. The sedan across from Serena's building sat still and dark under the November streetlights, and Zan sighted a man whose name appeared on no document, watched the entrance to the building, and waited for the moment that the light in the second-floor apartment went out. The light stayed on, and the clock ran down towards something that none of them, not Serena, not Lucian, not the man in the sedan, could fully see yet, but that all of them could feel coming the way you feel a storm before the sky is changed, in the pressure of the air and the particular stillness of everything that is about to be broken. This is a work of complete fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, locations, and events are entirely fictional. The light in the second-floor apartment stayed on. That was the first thing Richard Doss noticed from the sedan. 11:14 at night, and the light hadn't moved, hadn't dimmed, hadn't shifted the way lights shift when someone goes from room to room, getting ready for bed. It stayed steady and bright, which meant someone was awake and sitting still, and that was not the behavior of a woman who didn't know he was there. He picked up his phone. The man he'd sent to the building service entrance didn't answer. Doss looked at the entrance again. Nothing moving. The doorman at his station, reading something. Normal. He called again. Still no answer. He put the car in drive. He was pulling out when the 2 federal vehicles came around the corner from opposite directions simultaneously. The specific choreography of people who have been waiting for a car to move before they close the box. No sirens, just lights, and the particular deliberate speed of vehicles that have already won and know it. Doss had 3 seconds to understand what had happened. He used them well. He didn't panic, didn't floor it into a situation he couldn't escape. He put the car in park, put both hands on the wheel where they were visible, and sat very still while Agent Reyes walked up to his window with her credentials already out and her face arranged into the expression of someone who has been looking forward to this specific moment for 18 months. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Richard Doss," she said. "Step out of the vehicle." He stepped out. Upstairs, Serena heard nothing. She was still on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, Carla Fenn's voice in her ear. They'd been talking for 51 minutes by that point. Carla walking her through the Greystone structure from the inside, the shell companies, Doss's role, the communications between Doss and Caruso that had never made it into any document, but that Carla had witnessed and could testify to. Serena had been feeding it to Reyes through Marco on a separate line, a relay system she'd constructed in real time while sitting on a kitchen floor, which was not something she would have been capable of 8 weeks ago, and was not something she wanted to ever have to be capable of again. Marco knocked twice on her door at 11:22. She opened it. He looked at her with the particular economy of expression she'd come to recognize. Marco communicated in gradations of stillness, and this particular stillness meant it was over. "They have him," he said. She let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. "Carla Fenn," she said into the phone. "The federal agents are going to call you in the next 10 minutes. Tell them everything you told me, every word." "Is he?" "He's in custody." She leaned her head back against the doorframe. "You're okay. Your daughter's okay." She heard something on the other end of the line that might have a sob and might have been just air. Then Carla Fenn hung up. Serena stood in the doorway between her kitchen and her small hallway for a moment. Then she went to check on Nico. He was asleep on his back, arms thrown up, exactly as she'd left him. The nightlight made the room amber and soft. She stood in the doorway and looked at him and felt something enormous and wordless move through her and then settle. She heard the door. Lucian had a key. She'd given it to Marco, who'd let him in downstairs. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, the specific weight of them, and then he appeared behind her in the doorway to Nico's room. He didn't say anything. She didn't move. They stood there together in the amber light looking at their son, and the silence between them was not comfortable, but it was honest, which was more than most silences between them had ever been. "They got him," she said quietly. "Marco texted me," Lucian said. "Same quiet, it's done." He didn't answer right away. She felt him looking at Nico, the specific quality of attention he brought to looking at his son, which she'd seen twice now, and which was the same both times. Absolute. Undefended. Every wall that Lucian Moretti had ever built around himself went down when he looked at that child. Is it, he asked? Not challenging, just asking. Doss was the last piece, she said. Reyes confirmed before you got here. Between the Caruso arrest and the Moretti plea, and now Doss, the structure is finished. There's no one left with a reason to come after me. And your name. Reyes is filing the formal exoneration of the forged signature documents tomorrow. She paused. My name comes off everything. Clee nodded. They stood in the doorway for another moment. I should go, he said. You can stay until he wakes up, she said. The words surprised her a little. Not because she didn't mean them, but because she hadn't planned them. It's almost his feeding time anyway. Lucian was quiet. Okay, he said. They sat in her kitchen at midnight, with 2 cups of coffee neither of them drank much of, and the apartment was very quiet, and for a while neither of them spoke. This was not the uncomfortable silence of people avoiding something. It was the silence of 2 people who have both been running very hard in the same direction for different reasons and have arrived at the same place at the same time and need a moment to stop moving. Nico woke at 12:40. Serena fed him at the kitchen table, while Lucian sat across from her and looked at his son the way a man looks at something he knows he won't be allowed to look at for a long time. When do you report? She asked. January 15th. He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. I negotiated the timeline with Reyes. Sentencing is March. She's recommending 3 years based on the cooperation. He paused. Could be more depending on the judge. 3 years, she said. Maybe less with behavior. Maybe more without. He shrugged, and the shrug was one of the most honest things she'd seen him do. No bravado in it, no performance of acceptance. Just a man who had done the arithmetic and decided the answer was fair. It is what it is. Nico made a small sound. She shifted him. I want you to know something, Lucian said. He was looking at his coffee. I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to figure out if there was a version of this where I explained what happened in Sicily in a way that made it make sense. He looked up. There isn't one. I've looked at it from every angle. There's no explanation that makes it okay. I chose wrong. That's the whole story. She looked at him. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to I know you're not. He was quiet. I need you to understand something, she said. Nico had gone back to quiet against her shoulder. The divorce is final next month. That's not changing. You and I are done in the way that we were, and that's permanent. She kept her voice level. But you're his father, and whatever you did to me to us, you don't get to do to him. You don't get to be absent from his life because it's easier or because you've decided you don't deserve it. She looked at him. You call, you write, you show up. And when you get out, you figure out what kind of father you can be without an empire behind you and without anything to offer except yourself. She paused. That's the deal. He looked at her for a long time. Yeah, he said. Okay. I mean it, Lucian. I'm not doing this to be generous. I'm doing it because he's going to ask about you someday, and I want to be able to tell him that you chose to be present, even from a prison cell, even when it was hard. She shifted Nico again. Don't make me tell him something different. I won't, he said. She believed him. That was the strange part after everything, after Sicily and the photograph and Bianca and Caruso and the device in her baseboard and the sedan across the street. She still believed him when he said it quietly, with both hands around a cold cup of coffee at midnight. Not because he'd earned it back. Because she could read him well enough to know the difference between what he said when he was managing her and what he said when he was just telling the truth. This was just the truth. He left at 1:30. She walked him to the door and they stood in the small entryway, with Nico asleep on her shoulder between them. Take care of yourself, she said. You too. He looked at Nico one more time, reached out and put one hand on the baby's back gently, barely touching. Nico didn't stir. He's going to be something, Lucian said quietly. He already is, she said. Lucian took his hand back. He walked out. She closed the door, and this time the silence on the other side of it was different from the last time she'd closed a door on him. Less final, more like a chapter ending than a book. She stood in the entryway for a moment, her hand still on the door. Then she carried her son to bed. The divorce was finalized on December 19th. Marcus called her at 10 in the morning to tell her it was done, no ceremony to it. Just paperwork moving through a system and arriving at an outcome she'd set in motion in a hospital room with an empty chair beside her bed. She was sitting in her kitchen when he called. Same chair she'd been sitting in at midnight with Lucian, Nico in the bouncy seat on the table in front of her, making the experimental sounds he'd been discovering his voice could produce. It's done, Marcus said. Okay, she said. How are you? She looked at Nico. He was looking back at her with the focused, serious expression he'd been wearing more lately. Not a newborn's unfocused gaze anymore, but something more deliberate, like he was practicing looking. I'm okay, she said. And it was true in the specific way that okay is true when it means not finished but not broken, when it means functioning and forward-facing and aware that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is measurable and crossable, if not today, then eventually. Elena's taking you to dinner? Marcus asked. Tonight, yes. Good. He paused. I'll file the final name restoration documents this week. Serena Vale, officially. She smiled a little. Serena Vale. She'd been Serena Moretti for 7 years. She'd been Serena Vale for 24 before that. The name felt like something she'd left in a drawer and was picking back up, checking if it still fit, and it did, mostly, except that the woman wearing it now had different hands than the woman who'd set it down. She opened the risk consulting firm in February. Not glamorously, not with a launch party or a press release or any of the trappings that the old version of her life might have suggested. She rented 2 rooms in a building in the Flatiron district, hired a paralegal named Donna, who was 57 and had worked in white-collar defense for 20 years and had opinions about everything, and put a small sign on the door that said Vale Consulting Group. The work was what she knew. Helping legitimate businesses identify and exit entanglements with criminal financial structures, the exact thing she'd learned from the inside, living it. There was more of a market for it than most people understood. Businesses got tangled in things that didn't announce themselves as dangerous. Money moved through structures that looked clean on paper. People signed documents without understanding what they were part of. She understood all of that from a perspective that no business school course could teach. Donna, on her 3rd day, looked up from a file and said, "You know this stuff like you lived it." "I did," Serena said. Donna looked at her for a moment. "Good," she said. "That's the only way to actually know it," and went back to her file. Marcus referred her first 3 clients. By April, she had 6. By June, she had a waiting list. She hired a 2nd person. Then a 3rd. She worked from 8 until 3, when she picked up Nico from the woman who looked after him 2 streets away. And then she worked again from 8 in the evening until midnight, when she could, and she was tired in a way she hadn't expected. Not the exhausted hollowness of the hospital, not the running terror of Connecticut, but the good weight of something being built by her own hands. She called Elena every Sunday. She talked to her mother in Chicago twice a week. She did not date. She was not ready to date, and she knew it. And she didn't punish herself for knowing it. She had a son and a firm and a name she'd taken back, and that was enough for now. That was more than enough. Lucian's first letter arrived in March. Plain envelope, no return address, the handwriting she recognized from 7 years of notes left on kitchen counters and travel itineraries slipped under her office door. She stood at the kitchen counter and held it for a long moment before she opened it. It was 2 pages. He didn't write about the case or the plea or the organization or any of it. He wrote about Nico. What he looked like from memory, the small fists, the way he'd watched Lucian's face in the hospital with that serious, focused attention. He wrote about what he hoped Nico would be like when he was old enough to have opinions about things, and then he crossed that out and wrote that he didn't want to presume, that he understood that hope wasn't the same as entitlement, that he just wanted Nico to know when he was old enough, that his father had thought about him every day. He ended with, "I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm writing so there's a record." So he can read this someday if he wants to, and know that the time was spent thinking of him. She read it twice. Then she put it in a folder she labeled Nico Letters, and put the folder in the filing cabinet in her home office, and went back to making dinner. She wrote back 2 weeks later. Not much. 3 paragraphs. She told him what Nico was doing, the sounds he was making, the way he'd started to track faces across a room with his eyes, the fact that he slept better on his stomach than his back. But the pediatrician said back was safer, so they were managing the negotiation. She described him precisely and without sentiment and signed it Serena, and sent it to the address Marcus had given her. Lucian wrote back within a week. They wrote back and forth through the spring and into the summer, never about themselves, always about Nico. It was the strangest correspondence she'd ever been part of 2 people who had been married for 7 years and had destroyed each other in various ways, trading letters about a child's development, with the careful, specific attention of people who've agreed that this one thing at least they will not get wrong. She didn't forgive him. She didn't need to forgive him for the letters to mean something. Forgiveness was a different transaction entirely, one that she was not in a hurry to complete, one that might not ever be complete in the way people usually meant when they used the word. But she could hold what he'd done and what he was doing now as two separate true things simultaneously, and that was of its own kind of maturity, hard-won and not painless and worth something. Bianca Russo testified in the Moretti case in April. Serena read about it in the case materials Marcus forwarded. She was a named party in related proceedings and received regular updates. Bianca's testimony was what Lucian had described after his conversation with her. She'd believed she was protecting herself from an organization that intended to cut her out of an inheritance from her father's criminal associations. Caruso had presented the affair as mutual self-interest. She hadn't known about the forgeries, the shell companies, the full scope of what she'd been positioned inside. She was granted witness immunity in exchange for her cooperation. Serena sat with that for a day, the very human mess of it. A woman who'd been a villain in the stories of Serena's marriage turning out to be, like most villains, more complicated than the role assigned to her. Used, not using, afraid, not calculating. She didn't call Bianca. She didn't have anything to say to her that needed to be said. But she stopped seeing her as a face in a photograph and started seeing her as a person who'd been moved around aboard by the same hands that had moved Serena. And that shift in perception, small, unglamorous, nothing like closure, was its own kind of release. Danny Caruso pled guilty in May. Richard Doss was convicted at trial in July. Carla Fenn's testimony was the centerpiece, supported by the recording from Serena's phone and the document trail that Marcus and Reyes had built together over 6 months. Doss received 14 years. He showed no expression when the verdict was read, which Reyes told Serena was exactly what she'd expected from him. Serena wasn't in the courtroom. She was in her office in Flatiron, reviewing a file for a construction company in New Jersey that had gotten tangled in a financing structure it didn't fully understand. Donna brought her a cup of coffee at 3 in the afternoon and said, "The Doss verdict came in," and Serena looked up from the file and said, And Donna said, "Guilty. 14 years. And Serena said, "Okay," and went back to the file. Donna watched her for a moment. "That's it?" Donna asked. "That's it," Serena said. Donna shook her head slightly and went back to her desk, which was the right response. Serena had not spent 6 months building a life around the outcome of a criminal trial. The trial was a part of the story. It had to be completed. It mattered in the structural sense, but it was not the thing she'd been working toward. She'd been working toward the file on her desk and the firm with her name on the door and the son who would be picked up in 45 minutes. She finished the file. She picked up Nico. She carried him home. The first super meeting happened on a Saturday in September at Blackstone Park, which was Lucian's ideas and suggested in a letter in August, phrased as a question rather than a request, with a specific acknowledgement that she would decide and he would accept whatever she decided. She decided yes, not because she'd forgiven him, not because she was ready to rebuild anything, because Nico was 8 months old and Lucian had been writing letters for 6 months and showing up in the only way he currently could, with consistency and without agenda. And she'd told him in her kitchen at midnight that he didn't get to be absent, and she meant it both ways. She wasn't going to be the reason he was absent when he was trying. She arrived at the park at 9:45. Lucian was already there. He was sitting on a bench near the entrance, no guards, no coat, despite the September cool. In jeans and a plain jacket she'd never seen him wear before, nothing from the old wardrobe, nothing that announced what he'd been. He looked like a man who had spent several months becoming someone slightly different and was still figuring out how that fit. He stood when he saw her. She walked toward him with Nico on her hip. He looked at his son. Nico looked back at him with the serious, focused attention he brought to every new face measuring, cataloging, filing it somewhere in the developing architecture of an 8-month-old brain. Lucian crouched down to eye level and held out one hand, not reaching for Nico, just presenting himself as available. A gesture she hadn't expected from him. That kind of patience. Nico looked at the hand. Then he leaned forward from Serena's hip. She let him go. Lucian took him carefully, both hands, the same careful grip she'd watched in the hospital 8 months ago, and stood and held his son at eye level and looked at him with an expression that had no name she could think of. Not joy too complicated for joy, not grief too present for grief. Something that contained both and moved through them toward something that didn't have a word yet. Nico reached up and grabbed Lucian's jaw with one hand. Lucian made a sound short, involuntary, the sound of something unexpected hitting somewhere undefended. And then he held his son closer and stood in the September morning in Blackstone Park and breathed. Serena watched from 2 feet away. She did not cry. She did not feel the need to. This was not a moment that required her tears. It required her presence and her judgment and her willingness to stand here and allow something to happen that was right for her son, even when it was complicated for her. She was capable of that. She'd learned over the last 8 months that she was capable of a great deal more than she'd known. They walked for an hour. Lucian carried Nico most of the time, and Nico accepted this with the equanimity of an 8-month-old who has learned that being carried is generally preferable to not being carried. They walked the paths through the park without any particular destination, and they talked, not about the case, not about Sicily, not about the past, about Nico, his sounds, his expressions, the specific way he communicated displeasure before he could form words. Lucian asked questions, Serena answered them. It was stilted in places and quiet in others, and occasionally something almost resembling normal before one of them remembered the specific weight of everything that had led to this bench and this morning. At 10:45, Nico started fussing. He needs to eat, Serena said. Lucian passed him back. The handoff was practiced now. She'd done it 1,000 times in 8 months, and Nico settled immediately against her shoulder. They stood facing each other on the path. Thank you, Lucian said. For this, she looked at him. Don't thank me, she said. This isn't generosity. It's just what's right. He absorbed that. I know the difference, he said. I'm still grateful for it. She adjusted Nico on her shoulder. Next Saturday, she asked. Something moved in Lucian's face, controlled quickly, but she saw it, the specific impact of an unexpected thing landing. 10 o'clock, he said. 10 o'clock, she said. She turned and walked toward the park entrance with her son. She didn't look back. She didn't need to look back to know he was still standing on the path watching them go. She could feel it the way you feel observation, in the back of your neck, in the slight shift of air. He would stand there until they were out of sight, and then he would walk to whatever car he'd come in, and he would go back to the halfway house in Queens where he was living while he completed the terms of his sentence, and he would write a letter tonight that she would receive on Tuesday describing today with the careful precision he'd developed over months of practice. She would read it on Tuesday. She would put it in the folder labeled Nico Letters. She would go to work on Wednesday. That was how it went. Not with resolution that felt like a film ending, the kind where the music swells and camera back and the story looks completed from the outside. Life didn't compress itself into that shape. It kept its actual shape irregular, ongoing, full of Tuesdays, and work files and pediatrician appointments and letters from a man she'd divorced trying to be, from a distance, the father she'd told him he was required to be. Serena Vale, not Moretti. Vale, the name she'd worn before and was wearing, again built her firm and raised her son and existed in the world under her own name with her own authority and paid her own rent and made her own decisions. Some of those decisions were wrong. She was not a woman transformed into something perfect by difficulty. She was a woman who had been through something significant and had emerged on the other side of it, still herself, but with a clearer understanding of where herself ended and where other people's versions of herself began. That distinction mattered. She'd spent 7 years inside someone else's architecture, Lucian's empire, Lucian's world, Lucian's definition of what she was and what she contributed and what she was worth. She didn't blame him entirely for that. She'd chosen to live inside it. She'd found reasons to stay that were real reasons. She'd loved him genuinely and without performance. And that love had been real even when his choices around it were not. But she'd also learned, over the course of one extremely compressed and violent 8-week period of her life, that she was capable of things she hadn't known she was capable of. The conference room, the kitchen floor, the phone call to Reyes, the 60 minutes she'd built out of terror and necessity, and the particular stubbornness of a woman who had decided that her son's safety was not negotiable. She hadn't been trained for any of it. She'd just been paying attention for 7 years. Nico grew. He was, as Lucian had predicted, on a park bench in September something. He had his father's stillness and his mother's attention, the combination of which meant he watched everything and processed it quietly, and then acted with a directness that startled adults who weren't expecting it from a child. He had opinions early. He communicated them without apology. Serena watched him develop and felt something she could only describe as recognition, not of Lucian, not of herself, but of a third thing that was entirely his own. He received his father's letters. Serena read them to him first when he was too young to read, her voice neutral, factual. Your father writes that he's well. Your father wants you to know. Then when Nico was old enough, she gave him the folder and let him read them himself and sat nearby in case he had questions. He had questions. She answered them honestly, which meant acknowledging the hard parts without editorializing. Your father made choices that hurt our family. Yes. Your father also made choices that cost him a great deal in order to do something right. Both of those things are true about the same person. That's what people are, multiple true things at once. Not always coherent, not always justified, but real. Nico sat with that. He was, she thought, going to be very good at sitting with complicated things. The last scene of this story is small. It is not a courtroom, or a confrontation, or a recording that dismantles an empire. It is a park on a Saturday, years after everything that mattered happened, and Nico is running toward a man on a bench who arrived early and has no gifts and no guards. He runs the way children run, with his whole body, with complete commitment, without the self-consciousness that comes later. Lucian sees him coming and stands up from the bench and catches him and lifts him and holds him the way he held him in a hospital room 8 months old. Both hands, careful, overwhelmed by something that doesn't have a name. Serena watches from the path. She is not smiling exactly. Her face is doing something more complicated than smiling. The expression of a woman who has lost a great deal and built something real from what remained, who is standing in a park on a Saturday morning, watching the consequence of all of it, who is not happy in the simple way and is not unhappy in the simple way, but is present, fully deliberately present. Nico says something into Lucian's shoulder. She can't hear it from where she's standing. Lucian pulls back to look at his son's face. He says something back. Nico nods, very seriously, the way he nods when he has received information he intends to store. Then he looks back at his mother. Can he come next Saturday too? He calls across the path. She looks at her son. She looks at the man holding him. Lucian is not asking. He is waiting with a stillness that cost him something to acquire. The stillness of a man who has learned, at significant price, the difference between what you want and what you've earned the right to expect. 10 o'clock, she says. She says it the same way she said it the first time, flat and factual, a time not a promise, but they both know what it means. Not forgiveness, not restoration, not the marriage or the empire, or the life that broke apart in a hospital room at 6:47 in the morning when a newborn screamed into the world and his father was thousands of miles away saying not yet. It means there is a next Saturday. It means you can be here if you show up. It means this is the smallest door and it is open. And what you do with it is yours to decide now. Lucian arrived early. He will arrive early next Saturday. He will arrive early every Saturday that she allows. And he will bring nothing. And he will ask for nothing. And he will sit on a bench in a park and wait to be given what he has not earned back, but might over enough Saturdays, over enough letters, over enough time build something new from. Not the same thing. Something smaller. And possibly, in the way that small things sometimes are, more real than anything he built with fear and money, and a power that was never going to last. Serena Vale turned and walked back up the path toward the rest of her Saturday. The sun was out. The park was ordinary. Her son was laughing at something behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She already knew what was there. The firm had 12 employees by the time Nico started kindergarten. Serena noticed this the morning she walked in and counted, not deliberately. She wasn't the kind of person who marked milestones with ceremony, but she was standing at the coffee machine, and she looked across the open floor at the desks and the people at them, and counted 12, and thought about the 2 rented rooms in Flatiron where she'd started with Donna in a filing cabinet, and cases she'd taken, partly because they were available, and partly because she needed to prove to herself that she could. Donna's was still there. Senior partner now. Technically, though she refused the title and insisted on being called what she'd always been called, which was Donna, and she ran the intake process with the specific efficiency of a woman who had seen every variety of financial entanglement and had no patience for the ones that were self-inflicted. You should take the Hargrove case, Donna said that morning, handing Serena a file with her coffee. I looked at it last night. The exposure is significant, which is why they need someone who understands significant exposure. Donna gave her the look she'd been giving her for 4 years. The one that said, you know more than you think you know, and you've known it longer than you're admitting. Take the case. Serena took the case. That was how most of it went. Not dramatic. Not the compressed urgency of the year Nico was born. That year had used up what felt like a decade's worth of adrenaline, and what followed it was quieter in the way that things are quiet after a storm has actually finished. Not the false quiet before one. Real quiet. The kind you could build in. She built in it. Marcus retired in the spring of Nico's 4th year. He called her to tell her personally before he sent any announcement, which was Marcus even his retirement was handled with the specific protocol of a man who understood that how you did things mattered as much as what you did. She took him to lunch at a place on West 56 that she'd rediscovered on her own terms, ordered the thing she actually wanted instead of what she'd ordered when she was playing a role, and they sat for 2 hours talking about nothing particularly consequential and everything that was. At the end, he said, "You turned out to be very good at this." At what specifically, she said. All of it. He gestured vaguely, which from Marcus was expansive. The firm. The work. He paused. The version of yourself you built after. She looked at him. I had help, she said. You had resources, he said. That's different. Help implies someone else doing the work. He picked up his coffee. You did the work. She didn't argue with him, because he was right, and arguing with correct assessments had never been something she had energy for. She just absorbed it the way she'd learned to absorb things that were true and useful directly, without deflecting, without the self-deprecating reflex. She'd spent years practicing in rooms full of powerful men who expected women to minimize themselves as a courtesy. She didn't minimize herself anymore. It turned out nobody actually required it. The people who had required it were gone arrested, imprisoned, dismantled, or simply no longer present in the specific ecosystem she now occupied. The people in her life now either didn't need her to be small or actively preferred that she wasn't. It was, she thought, a better selection of people. Elena got married in October of that same year to a woman named Priya, who taught architecture at Columbia and had strong opinions about mid-century furniture, and made Elena laugh in a way Serena had never heard from her before. The wedding was small, a restaurant in Brooklyn, 30 people, Nico in a small suit he'd selected himself after rejecting 4 other options on the grounds that they were, in his assessment, not right. He was 4 years old and he knew what he wanted. Serena danced with him at the reception, a slow song he didn't know the rhythm of, but participated in enthusiastically anyway, both hands gripping hers, stepping on her feet twice without apology. She looked down at him and felt something so large and clean that it was almost uncomfortable, the way extreme brightness is uncomfortable. Not bad, just more than the eye expects. She thought about 6:47 in the morning. She thought about the empty chair. She thought about how she'd stared at it and felt something break permanently, and she'd been right that it was permanent. It hadn't healed back into what it was. But broken things didn't only become broken. Sometimes they became the reason you built something different. She looked at her son stepping on her feet in a Brooklyn restaurant at his aunt's wedding. Different was fine. Different was in fact everything. Lucian completed his sentence 14 months early. Reyes called her personally when the early release was confirmed a professional courtesy, she said, given his role in the case. Serena thanked her and hung up and sat at her desk for a moment with her hands flat on the surface. She'd known it was coming. The letters had mentioned the review process carefully, without pressure. He'd been meticulous about not creating pressure, which she recognized as its own kind of discipline for a man who had spent his entire adult life applying pressure as a professional tool. She called him that evening. He picked up on the second ring. I heard, she said. Yeah. His voice was different from the voice she'd known in the marriage. Not weakened, something more precise. Like it had been edited down to what was actually necessary. I wanted to tell you myself, but Reyes moved faster. When? 3 weeks. She looked at the window. The city beyond it, ordinary and ongoing. I'm not going to make this complicated, she said. I know, the Saturday arrangement continues. Same terms. Same terms, he agreed, and Lucian. She paused. You're going to need to figure out what your life looks like now. Outside. With opt and restarted. Without the structure you had. That's going to be hard. I know that too. I'm not offering to help with that part, she said. That's yours. I know. A pause. I'm not asking you to. She believed that also. They weren't the same 2 people who had stood in a hospital parking garage with an expensive bracelet and a series of prepared explanations. They were 2 people who had been through the same fire from opposite sides and had come out the other end knowing each other in a more accurate way. Not a warmer way, not a closer way, but a truer one. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he confirmed. She hung up and went to make dinner and helped Nico with the letters he was learning, and put him to bed and read him the book he'd selected, which was about a bear who couldn't find his hat and was very upset about it. And then she sat in her kitchen in the quiet and thought about 3 weeks and decided that it was simply Saturday. Just the next Saturday. That was all it needed to be. She was 37 years old. Her son was 4. Her firm was real. Her name was her own. The woman who had stood in a hospital room at 6:47 in the morning, holding a newborn against her chest and staring at an empty chair had become, not through intention exactly, but through the specific pressure of necessity and time and her own refusal to stay broken Sumyeon, she recognized more fully than she'd recognized herself in years. Not happy in the simple way, not finished, but oriented, moving, building forward into a future that was hers to construct with her own hands, from materials she'd chosen. That was enough. She had learned, more than enough. It was everything.